My brother invited us to a celebratory dinner, then purposely gave us the wrong time so they could eat without us. As his wife laughed at my starving 8-year-old son, they racked up a massive bill. They didn't know I owned the entire restaurant chain. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss the justice that follows. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The sound of cracking shell against porcelain was loud, deliberate, and violent. It echoed in the sudden silence of the private booth, a sharp punctuation mark to the humiliation that was currently washing over me in hot, suffocating waves. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, gripping my own fingers so tightly that the knuckles had turned a bruised, ghostly white. Beside me, my 8-year-old son, Mason, was staring down at the pristine, empty white charger plate in front of him. He wasn't crying. He was too old for that, he would have insisted. But his lower lip was trembling in that subtle, heartbreaking way that only a mother notices. He looked small. Smaller than usual. The oversized menu, which he hadn't even been offered a chance to open, lay closed near his elbow. Across the table, the carnage of a feast lay spread out like a conqueror's spoil. 3-tiered silver towers, the kind that cost more than my monthly utility bills combined, stood stripped and dripping with melting ice. The grandiose displays of lobster tails, king crab legs, and premium oysters were reduced to shells and debris. The scent of garlic butter, truffle oil, and expensive Chardonnay hung heavy in the air, a cloying perfume of excess that made my empty stomach turn. "Oh, don't look so tragic, Evelyn," Peyton said, her voice trilling with that artificial lightness she used when she wanted to twist a knife. She dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, checking it for lipstick stains before dropping it onto the table. Honestly, it's a life lesson for him. Punctuality is a virtue. If you want the lobster, you have to be on time for the lobster. She picked up her wine glass, a vintage Sancerre, I noted, likely $70 a glass, and swirled it, her eyes dancing with malicious amusement as she looked at Mason's downcast face. "We're hungry," Mason whispered, his voice barely audible over the ambient jazz of the restaurant. "We already ordered without you," my brother Asher said through a mouthful of scallop. He didn't even look up from his plate. He was busy sawing through the last bite of a surf and turf combo that looked big enough to feed a family of 4. Grease shone on his chin. "I told you, Ev, 7:00 p.m. sharp. We waited 10 minutes. We couldn't let the reservation lapse. This place is exclusive. You can't just hold tables for people who can't manage a schedule." I looked at my phone, sitting face up on the table. The screen displayed the text message Asher had sent me yesterday. "Dinner at 7:30 p.m. Don't be late." We had arrived at 7:25 p.m. They had been eating for an hour. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a miscommunication. I looked at Asher, a man I had bilayed out of debt 3 times in the last 5 years. I looked at Peyton, whose engagement ring I had essentially paid for when Asher borrowed $5,000 for a business investment that evaporated. They were glowing with the gluttonous satisfaction of a free meal, assuming, as they always did, that big sister Evelyn would sigh, pull out her corporate credit card, and smooth everything over because family is family. Mason's stomach gave a loud, undeniable growl, cutting through the low hum of conversation. Peyton actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of warmth. "Oh my God, Asher, listen to that. You'd think you never feed the poor kid." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing on Mason. "Should have taught him not to be late, Evelyn. Maybe next time he'll hustle a little faster." Something inside me, a structural beam of patience that had been holding up the weight of our relationship for decades, finally snapped. It didn't break with a bang. It disintegrated into dust. I looked at Mason's shame. I looked at the grease on my brother's face. I looked at the smirk on his wife's lips. The betrayal wasn't just about the food. It wasn't about the money. It was the casual cruelty of it, the way they enjoyed Mason's hunger. "I'll remember this," I said softly. Peyton rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being dramatic. Order him a side of fries or something. But hurry up, we're thinking about dessert. They thought I was broken. They thought I was the same doormat I had been since our parents died. But as I watched Asher signal for the dessert menu, snapping his fingers at a passing waiter, he had no idea that he was snapping his fingers at my employee. The betrayal was worse than the hunger, worse than the lie. But as I watched them pick their teeth, oblivious to the storm gathering across the table, I knew one thing they didn't. They were dining in my house. The road to that table had been paved with good intentions, which, as they say, is the primary construction material for hell. Just 24 hours earlier, I had been sitting in my home office, buried under a mountain of spreadsheets and architectural blueprints. My phone had buzzed, lighting up with Asher's name. My stomach had done that familiar little flip, the Pavlovian response to seeing a family member's name who only calls when they need a wire transfer. I had hesitated before answering. I was tired. My work as a hospitality consultant, a vague title I used to cover the scope of what I actually did, was demanding. I had spent the last 6 months overseeing the aggressive expansion of the Gilded Anchor, a high-end seafood conglomerate that was taking the West Coast by storm. I was exhausted, my eyes burned, and I just wanted to sleep. But I answered because he was my brother. Ev, Asher's voice had been booming, overly cheerful, the voice of a man who was selling something. Great news, huge news, you sitting down. I'm working, Asher, I had said, rubbing my temples. What is it? Is everything okay? Is it the car payments again? No, God, ye of little faith, he chuckled, though the sound had a brittle edge to it. I closed the deal. The crypto mining facility in Nevada, we found a buyer. I'm flush, Ev, seriously, I'm back on top. I paused. Asher had been back on top 6 times in the last decade. Usually, that meant he had found a new credit card with a high limit or borrowed money from a loan shark he hadn't told me about yet. That's great, Asher, I said, trying to inject some genuine enthusiasm into my voice. I'm happy for you. So, to celebrate, he rushed on, steamrolling over my hesitation, Peyton and I are taking you out. A real dinner, high class, our treat. We want to thank you for, well, you know, helping us through the rough patch last winter. I softened. I couldn't help it. Despite everything, the unpaid loans, the snide comments, the years of taking a backseat to his drama, I just wanted my brother to win. I wanted us to be a normal family. That sounds nice, I said, and I meant it. Where were you thinking? The Gilded Anchor, he announced proudly. The new flagship location downtown. I know it's impossible to get a table, but I pulled some strings. I know a guy. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. He knew a guy. I was the one who had approved the lease for that building. I was the one who had handpicked the executive chef. I was the silent partner holding a 30% equity stake in the entire restaurant group. But Asher didn't know that. To him, and to the rest of the world, I was just a mid-level manager for a logistics firm. I kept my wealth quiet. I learned a long time ago that money changes people, and it ruins families. That sounds wonderful, Asher, I said, playing along. I've heard it's excellent. It's the best, he bragged. So, tomorrow night, bring Mason. I want my nephew there to see his uncle winning. 7:30 p.m. Don't be late, Evelyn, seriously. These places are strict. I'll be there, I promised. 7:30. I hung up feeling a rare warmth in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe he had finally turned a corner. I told Mason immediately. His face lit up. Uncle Asher is taking us to the fancy fish place? Mason asked, his eyes wide. Can I wear my tie? You can wear whatever you want, buddy, I told him, ruffling his hair. We spent the next afternoon getting ready. Mason spent 20 minutes trying to tie his little clip-on tie perfectly straight. He was so excited. He idolized Asher, despite the fact that Asher rarely remembered his birthday. We drove into the city, listening to Mason's favorite songs, the mood light and hopeful. We arrived at the Valet at 7:20 p.m. We walked into the lobby at 7:25 p.m. I remembered the way the hostess, a young woman named Sarah, whom I had personally interviewed 3 months ago, had looked at me when we walked in. Her eyes had widened in recognition, her back straightening instinctively. "Ms. Evelyn," she had stammered, catching herself on the protocol I insisted on. "I didn't want special treatment when I was off the clock. We didn't know you were coming in tonight." "Just a family dinner, Sarah," I had whispered, smiling and putting a finger to my lips. "I'm meeting the party under Asher. We're a few minutes early for the 7:30 reservation." Sarah's face had fallen. She looked down at her iPad, then back at me, biting her lip. "Ms. Evelyn," she whispered, leaning over the podium. "The reservation for that table was for 7:00 p.m. They've been seated for half an hour. The appetizers have already been cleared." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "Are you sure?" "Positive," she said gently. "They ordered immediately. The ticket is extensive." I stood there in the lobby, Mason holding my hand, his little palm warm and trusting in mine. I checked my texts again. Dinner at 7:30 p.m. He had lied. Why would he lie about the time? Maybe he got confused, I murmured to myself, though the pit in my stomach was already opening up. "It's fine, Sarah, take us to the table." As we walked through the dining room, navigating the sea of white tablecloths and crystal glassware, I saw them. They were in the prime corner booth 1, the VIP table. Asher was laughing loudly, holding a crab leg like a scepter. Peyton was taking a selfie with an oyster. They looked happy, they looked rich, they looked like people who didn't have a care in the world. But as I approached, seeing the devastation of the seafood towers they had decimated without us, I realized the cruelty was the point. This wasn't a celebration of his success. This was a display of dominance. I sat down, my heart hammering against my ribs, and listened to Peyton mock my son. They had forgotten one crucial thing, though. In a restaurant, the customer is king, but the owner is God. To understand why I didn't flip the table right then and there, you have to understand the history of Asher and Evelyn. Our parents died when I was 22 and Asher was 18. I was just finishing college, ready to start my life. Asher was Asher. He was charismatic, loud, and allergic to responsibility. When the estate was settled, there wasn't much. A small life insurance policy and the house. I used my half to get a master's degree in business administration. I worked 2 jobs, bartending at night and interning during the day. I scraped, I saved, and I invested every penny I had into a failing diner that I turned around in 2 years. That was the start. Asher used his half to buy a bright yellow Hummer and fund a record label that produced exactly 0 songs. When the money ran out, he came to me. And because I was the big sister, because I had promised our mother on her deathbed that I would look after him, I said yes. I paid his rent when he decided to become a life coach. I paid his legal fees when his import-export business turned out to be a pyramid scheme. I paid for his wedding to Peyton, a lavish affair in Napa Valley that cost more than my first house. And then there was Peyton. Peyton was 35 going on 16. She described herself as a lifestyle curator on social media, which mostly meant she posted photos of things she couldn't afford and judged people who worked for a living. She had hated me from the moment we met. I was the boring, practical sister-in-law. I drove a Volvo. I wore practical suits. I didn't have Botox, and I didn't care about the latest influencer drama. To Peyton, I was an ATM with a pulse. "So," Asher said now, wiping his hands on a napkin that was already stained orange with seafood boil sauce. He leaned back, the buttons on his shirt straining. "The business is flying, flying. We're looking at a penthouse downtown next week. You should come see it. It's got a view of the bridge." "A penthouse," I repeated, my voice flat. "That sounds expensive, Asher." "You have to spend money to make money," he said, reciting the line like a mantra he didn't understand. "It's about the image. Clients need to see that you're successful. That's why we came here. Best place in the city. Only the movers and shakers eat here." He gestured around the room, his eyes scanning the other diners with a desperate sort of hunger. He wasn't enjoying the food, he was enjoying being seen eating the food. "Speaking of image," Peyton chimed in, looking at me with faux concern. "Evelyn, honey, that blouse, is that the same one you wore to Christmas 2 years ago?" It was a silk blouse from a designer label, classic and timeless. But to Peyton, anything older than a season was trash. "I like this blouse," I said calmly. I reached over and broke a piece of bread from the basket, the only thing left on the table that was edible, and handed it to Mason. He took it gratefully, gnawing on the crust. "Well, maybe with Asher doing so well now, we can take you shopping," Peyton smirked. "Get you something that doesn't scream corporate middle management." She laughed again, and Asher joined in. A booming, sycophantic guffaw that grated on my nerves. "We just want you to look your best, Ev," Asher said, reaching for the wine bottle and pouring the last drops into his glass. He shook the bottle upside down, frowning when it ran dry. "Waiter, another bottle, the reserve list." He snapped his fingers, actually snapped them. My blood ran cold. "Asher," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "You've ordered 3 towers. You've had 2 bottles of wine. You're ordering a third. Do you have any idea how much this bill is?" Asher waved his hand dismissively. "Relax, I told you I'm flush, the crypto deal." "Yeah," Peyton added, leaning in. Top counting pennies, Evelyn. It's so unbecoming. God, you're such a buzzkill. No wonder your husband left." The air left the booth. Mason stopped chewing his bread. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. He knew that was the line. That was the one thing you didn't say. My husband hadn't left. He had died of a sudden aneurysm 4 years ago. Mason had found him. Peyton knew that. She knew exactly what she was saying. She was rewriting history to hurt me, to make me small, to make herself feel powerful in her borrowed jewelry and her fake tan. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the insecurity beneath the heavy makeup. I saw the cruelty in her eyes that came from a deep, rotting unhappiness. And I saw my brother, a man who would let his wife desecrate the memory of a dead man just to keep the peace and keep the money flowing. They were monsters, and they were eating at my table. "You're right," I said. My voice was eerily calm. I felt a strange sensation wash over me, the icy clarity of absolute resolve. "I shouldn't worry about the bill. It's your celebration, after all." "Exactly," Asher said, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. "Now, where is that waiter?" I watched the waiter approach. It was Thomas, one of my best servers. He looked stressed. He was carrying the dessert menu, but his eyes darted to me, seeking guidance. He knew who I was. He knew I hated rude customers, and he had just watched these 2 people treat his boss like garbage. I gave Thomas a barely perceptible nod. A tiny inclination of the head that said, "Proceed. Give them exactly what they want." The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for it to spring. The 3rd bottle of wine arrived with a flourish. Thomas, playing his part to perfection, presented the label to Asher with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. It was a 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon from a limited vineyard in Napa, a bottle that retailed on our menu for $450. "Excellent," Asher grunted, waving a hand dismissively without even checking the vintage. "Just pour it, and keep it coming." I watched the dark red liquid swirl into the crystal glass. My brother's face was flushed, a sheen of perspiration glistening on his forehead. The alcohol was loosening his inhibitions, but it was also making him sloppy. He was vibrating with a nervous energy that didn't match the conquering hero narrative he was trying to spin. Beside me, Mason shifted in his seat, his small stomach giving another audible rumble. He looked at the bread basket, which was now empty save for a few crumbs. "Thomas," I said, cutting through Peyton's monologue about her new personal trainer. Thomas froze mid-pour, his eyes locking onto mine. "Yes, ma'am." "My son is hungry," I said, my voice cutting through the table chatter like a diamond through glass. "He would like the captain's burger, medium well, no onions, extra fries." The table went silent. Peyton dropped her fork. Evelyn, seriously? A burger? This is a seafood restaurant, and look at the time. It's nearly 8:30. A heavy meal like that, he'll get fat. Do you want him to be the chubby kid in class? I turned my head slowly to look at her. I didn't blink. He is 8 years old, Peyton, and he is starving because you played games with the reservation time. He will eat. I turned back to Thomas. And bring him a Shirley Temple, extra cherries. Right away, Thomas said, bowing slightly before retreating with a speed that suggested he was eager to escape the blast zone. You spoil him, Asher muttered into his wine glass, taking a gulp that was far too large for polite company. Soft, that's the problem with kids these days. No discipline. I reached for my phone, sliding it onto my lap under the napkin. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Asher's crypto windfall story had more holes in it than the fishing nets hanging on the wall as decor. I opened the company's internal messaging app, a secure channel used by senior management. I found the contact for Michael, the general manager of this location. Me, Booth 1, status of the bill. Michael typing immediately. Current tab is at $1,240.50. $3 towers, 3 bottles of reserve, appetizers. Shall I intervene? Me, no, let them order whatever they want, but authorize a credit check on the reservation holder silently. I want to know if the card on file is viable. I slipped the phone back onto the table just as Asher leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white tablecloth, staining it with invisible grease. The celebration phase was ending. I could see it in his eyes. The ask was coming. So, Ev, he started, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The reason I really wanted you here, besides celebrating, of course, is that I want to give you an opportunity. I picked up my water glass, sipping slowly. An opportunity. The penthouse I mentioned, he continued, licking his lips. The seller is highly motivated. But because the funds from the Nevada deal are technically still in escrow, you know how banks are, total nightmare with the red tape, I need a bridge. There it was, the trap. A bridge, I repeated. Just a short-term float, he said quickly, waving his hand as if $50,000 was pocket change. To secure the deposit. If I don't put the cash down by Monday, I lose the unit. And Peyton, well, she's already picked out the curtains. Peyton smiled at me, a tight, predatory baring of teeth. It has a walk-in closet, Evelyn. You could fit your entire apartment in it. My phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down surreptitiously. Michael, card on file is a prepaid debit with a remaining balance of $12.40. Declined on the pre-auth. I felt a cold, hard knot of anger tighten in my chest. They hadn't just invited me to show off. They hadn't just invited me to pay. They had invited me to a dinner they explicitly could not afford, ordered over $1,000 of food, and were now trying to extract cash from me for a house that didn't exist. They were trying to rob me, and they were using my own restaurant to do it. Thomas arrived with the burger. It was a masterpiece, a half-pound of Wagyu beef, melted cheddar, and a mountain of golden, crispy fries. The smell was intoxicating. Mason's eyes went wide. He looked at me for permission. Eat, baby, I whispered. As Mason took his first joyous bite, I turned my full attention to my brother. The time for politeness was over. There is no escrow, Asher, I said. Asher blinked, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. What? The Nevada deal, I said, keeping my voice level but hard. There is no buyer, there is no escrow, and there is no penthouse. Asher lowered the glass, a flash of genuine panic flickering behind his eyes before he masked it with indignation. You don't know what you're talking about. The contract is signed. It's confidential. I can't just show you the paperwork. You can't show me the paperwork because it doesn't exist, I countered. Just like the import-export business didn't exist. Just like the life coaching certification didn't exist. You're broke, Asher. You've maxed out your credit cards, haven't you? Peyton slammed her hand on the table. the silverware rattled. How dare you? We take you out to a nice dinner, we try to share our success with you, and you sit there and call your own brother a liar? This is jealousy, Evelyn. Pure, ugly jealousy. Just because you're alone and miserable doesn't mean we have to be. I'm not the one trying to scam my family out of a down payment for a fantasy apartment, I said, locking eyes with her. And I'm not the one eating a $300 seafood platter with $12 in my bank account. The silence that followed was absolute. Asher's face drained of color. He looked like he had been slapped. How could you possibly know what's in my bank account? It doesn't matter how I know, I said. What matters is that you ordered this food with no intention of paying for it. You assumed I would pick up the check. You assumed I would write you a check for the apartment. You assumed I was stupid. I wasn't going to make you pay, Asher sputtered, his lie crumbling under the weight of reality. I forgot my wallet. I was going to ask you to spot me, and I'd wire it back tomorrow. You forgot your wallet, I repeated deadpan, but you remembered to bring your appetite. You're unbelievable, Peyton hissed, her face twisting into a mask of ugliness. You sit on that little pile of savings Mom left you, which should have been split evenly, by the way, and you judge us for trying to live a little? You owe us, Evelyn. You owe Asher. He's the only family you have left. Family doesn't starve an 8-year-old boy to prove a point about punctuality. I shot back, my voice rising just enough to turn heads at the nearby tables. Mason stopped chewing. He shrank back into the booth, sensing the violence in the air. I reached out and touched his arm gently, grounding him, but my eyes never left Peyton. We didn't starve him, Peyton shrieked. He's eating a burger, isn't he? A burger I'm going to end up paying for. No, I said softly, you won't. Asher drained his glass. He looked cornered. He looked dangerous, not physically, but in the way a desperate animal is dangerous. He looked around the room, realizing that people were staring. His facade of the wealthy businessman was cracking, and he needed to regain control. Check, Asher yelled, snapping his fingers in the air again, louder this time. Waiter, check, we're leaving, my sister is making a scene. He glared at me. Fine, you want to play hardball, we'll leave, I'll pay the bill. And then you are out of our lives, Evelyn. You won't see Mason's cousins, you won't see us for Christmas. You're dead to us. That's a promise, I asked. Thomas appeared instantly, holding the black K leather folder. He didn't place it on the table. He held it with both hands, looking directly at Asher. Your check, sir, Thomas said. Asher snatched the folder. He opened it with an aggressive flip, ready to throw down a card and storm out, likely planning to dispute the charge later or hope the overdraft protection kicked in for one last miracle. He looked at the number at the bottom of the receipt. His hand froze, his jaw went slack. The bluster evaporated, replaced by the sheer, terrifying reality of mathematics. 1,400, he stammered. He looked up at Thomas. This is a mistake, there's a mistake. We didn't order this much. 3 grand plateaus, sir, Thomas recited from memory. 3 bottles of the Reserve Cabernet, 2 appetizers, 1 Wagyu burger, plus the gratuity for a party of your size. Asher swallowed hard. He looked at Peyton. Peyton looked at the bill and gasped. $1,400 for fish? This is robbery. Asher looked at me. The anger was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wheedling desperation. Ev, he whispered. I really did leave my main card at home. I just have the debit. It has a limit. Just cover this one time, please. I'll sign a promissory note. Anything. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had laughed while my son stared at an empty plate. No, I said. What do you mean no? Asher's voice cracked. I mean no, I said, leaning back in the plush booth. I am not paying for your lobster. I am not paying for your wine. And I am certainly not paying for the insults you've hurled at my son. You have to, Peyton screeched. She grabbed Asher's arm. She has to, right? She can't just leave us here. I can, I said, and I will. Asher wiped his face with his napkin. He was sweating profusely now. Evelyn, please, they'll call the cops. This is theft of services. You want your brother to go to jail? Over a dinner. You should have thought about that before you ordered the third bottle of wine, I said coldly. Asher's panic turned into aggression. It was his default defense mechanism. If he couldn't charm his way out, and he couldn't beg his way out, he would bully his way out. He stood up, towering over the table. This is ridiculous. I am not paying this. The food was cold, the service was slow, and this wine, he gestured to the empty bottle, it was corked. I refuse to pay for this garbage. He was shouting now. The entire dining room had gone silent. Forks paused midair. Conversations died. All eyes were on booth 1. Sir, Thomas said, taking a step back but standing his ground. The wine was opened at the table. You tasted it and approved it. I don't care, Asher yelled, his face turning a mottled red. Get me your manager. Now, I want this bill comped. Do you know who I am? I'm a very influential investor in this city. One bad review from me and this place is finished. I watched him quietly. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. He was digging his grave with a backhoe. I'll get the manager, Thomas said calmly. Yeah, you do that, Peyton added, standing up to join her husband's tantrum. And tell him we expect an apology. Our sister-in-law was treated rudely, our food was late, and this price is extortion. She looked down at me, her eyes gleaming with a twisted victory. She thought this was the play. Make a scene, intimidate the staff, get the bill erased. It was a strategy of the shameless. You're pathetic, Evelyn, Peyton sneered. Sitting there while we fight for our rights, you have no backbone. Sit down, Peyton, I said. You're making a fool of yourself. I'm making a statement, she retorted. This is how the world works. You demand respect and you get it. Watch and learn. I saw movement in the periphery. Walking across the dining room floor was Michael, the general manager. He was a tall man, impeccable in his charcoal suit, with the demeanor of a diplomat and the eyes of a shark. He wasn't rushing. He walked with the measured pace of a man who held all the cards. Behind him, 2 security guards, discreet, burly men in black suits, drifted closer to the entrance of the booth, blocking the exit path. Asher didn't see the security. He only saw Michael. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his jacket, preparing to unleash his Karen routine on the unsuspecting manager. Finally, Asher boomed as Michael approached the table. Are you the manager? Because I have a laundry list of complaints about this establishment. Michael stopped 2 feet from the table. He didn't look at Asher. He didn't look at Peyton. He looked directly at me. Good evening, Michael said, his voice smooth and professional. He ignored Asher entirely. Asher blinked, confused. Hey, I'm talking to you. I'm the customer. Actually, Michael said, finally turning his gaze to Asher. It was a cold, dismissive look. You are a guest, and a problematic one at that. Excuse me, Peyton. Gasped, do you know who we are? I know exactly who you are, Michael said. He held up a tablet. Mr. Asher Davis. Several unpaid judgments in the state of Nevada. A credit score that wouldn't qualify for a gas station rewards card, and a prepaid debit card with insufficient funds. Asher's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. That's private information. That's illegal. It's public record, Michael said dryly. And when you attempt to defraud an establishment of this caliber, we do our due diligence. We aren't defrauding anyone, Asher shouted, his voice cracking. My sister is paying, Evelyn, tell him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Michael turned back to me. His expression softened into one of deference. He clasped his hands behind his back and bowed his head slightly. My apologies for the disturbance, madam, Michael said to me. I assumed you wanted to let the scene play out, but they are disturbing the other guests. Shall I have security remove them now, or would you like to handle the disposition of the bill first? The silence that slammed into the table was heavier than the seafood towers. Asher froze. His finger was still pointing at me, but his hand had started to tremble. Peyton looked from Michael to me, then back to Michael. Her brain was trying to process the visual data. The manager was bowing to the woman she had just called pathetic. "Madam," Asher whispered. Why is he calling you madam?" I stood up slowly. I wiped the corners of my mouth with my napkin and placed it gently on the table. I smoothed down the front of my corporate middle management silk blouse. "Because Asher," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the silent restaurant. "He doesn't work for you, he works for me." Chapter 7, Climax. "You're lying," Peyton stammered, her voice shaking but desperate to find footing. She looked around the restaurant, her eyes darting from the silent diners to the imposing security guards, trying to find anyone who would validate her reality. "She's lying. Asher, tell him. She's a consultant. She works in an office. She drives a Volvo, for God's sake." Asher didn't speak. He was staring at me, really staring at me, for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing the sister who bylaid him out. He wasn't seeing the safety net. He was seeing the predator that had been sitting quietly in the tall grass while he grazed. "I am a consultant," I said, my voice steady and cool, carrying effortlessly through the hushed room. "I consult for the Gilded Anchor Group. I also happen to own 30% of it. I bought the controlling stake of the parent company 4 years ago, Asher, right after Mark died. I took the insurance money, I leveraged the house, and I bet on myself. Unlike you, when I gamble, I win." "No," Asher whispered, his face crumbling. "No, you would have told me. You would have told us." "Why?" I asked, taking a step closer to the table. "So you could ask for a bigger loan? So you could guilt me into funding your record label or your crypto farm with my company's capital? I kept it a secret to protect myself from you." "We're family," Peyton screeched, finding her voice again. She stood up, knocking her chair back. It clattered loudly against the floor. "You can't treat us like this. We are your family, you own this place. Fine, then comp the bill, that's what family does, they help each other." "Help," I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Help is what I did when I paid your rent in 2022. Help is what I did when I paid off your credit cards in 2024. This," I gestured to the decimated seafood towers, the empty wine bottles, the wreckage of their gluttony. "This isn't asking for help. This is theft. This is entitlement. This is you, sitting there, laughing at my 8-year-old son because he was hungry, while you gorged yourselves on food you knew you couldn't pay for." I turned to Michael. "Michael, what is the policy for guests who attempt to dine and dash on a bill exceeding $1,000? "We prosecute, madam," Michael said instantly, his voice clipped and efficient. "We detain the individuals and contact the local authorities immediately. It is a felony amount." Asher's knees gave out. He slumped back into the booth, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. "Felony," he squeaked. Evelyn, please, I have a record. You know I have a record from the import thing. If I get a felony charge, I go away. I go to prison." "I know," I said. "You can't do this," Peyton yelled, tears of rage streaming down her face, ruining her spray tan. "He's your brother. You can't send your brother to prison over a few lobsters." "I'm not sending him to prison," I corrected her gently. "He sent himself. He ordered the wine. He ordered the crab. He lied about the time. He set the trap. I'm just refusing to step into it." "I'll pay," Asher cried out, patting his pockets frantically. Pulling out his wallet, his keys, a crumpled pack of gum. "I'll pay, I have the debit card, try it again. Maybe the transfer went through, try it again." He shoved the card at Michael. Michael didn't take it, he looked at me. "Run it," I said, "let everyone see." Michael nodded to Thomas, who took the card and walked over to the portable terminal at the server station nearby. The room was deathly silent. The only sound was the beep of the machine. Beeps, beep, beep. We waited 10 seconds, 20 seconds. BZZZZT. The harsh, electronic sound of rejection echoed through the dining room. "Declined," Thomas announced, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Insufficient funds." Asher put his head in his hands. He began to sob. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the ugly, snotty sobbing of a man who has realized that the world has finally stopped tolerating him. "This is your fault." Peyton turned on him, screaming, her manicured fingers clawing at his shoulder. "You said you had the money, you said the deal closed, you brought me here, you humiliated me." "You ordered the third bottle," Asher shouted back, pushing her hand away. "You wanted the oysters, you wanted the picture for Instagram." "Because you told me we were rich," she shrieked. "Enough," I said. They both froze, panting, looking at me. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, addressing them like the unruly children they were. "I am going to finish my dinner with my son. We are going to have dessert. And while we do that, you are going to figure out how to pay this bill." "We can't," Asher wailed. "We don't have it." "Then you better start calling people," I said coldly. "Call your friends, call your other relatives, call a bail bondsman, I don't care. But you are not leaving this building until that tab is settled, and if you try to leave—" I nodded to the security guards. They stepped forward, crossing their massive arms. "They will stop you, and the police will be called." "Evelyn," Asher whispered, reaching a hand out across the table toward me. "Please, just this once. I swear I'll never ask you for anything again. Just pay it. For Mom." I looked at his hand. I remembered holding it when we were kids, crossing the street. I remembered holding it at Mom's funeral. I remembered holding it the first time he got arrested. I had held onto that hand for 30 years, trying to pull him up. But I realized now that he wasn't trying to climb. He was just using me as an anchor to keep himself from drifting away, dragging me down with him. "Mom is dead, Asher," I said softly. "And the sister who enabled you died tonight too, right around the time you laughed at my son's empty plate." I turned my back on them. "Michael," I said, "please move us to the owner's table on the patio. It's a bit loud in here." "Right away, madam," Michael said. I took Mason's hand. "Come on, baby, let's go get some ice cream." We walked away. We walked past their table, past the ruins of their feast, past their tears and their shouting. We didn't look back. Chapter 8, Resolution. We sat on the private terrace, overlooking the city lights. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere of the dining room. Thomas brought Mason a massive sundae, 3 scoops of vanilla bean, hot fudge, whipped cream, and enough cherries to make a small fruit salad. Mason's eyes were the size of saucers. "Is this all for me?" he asked, whispering as if he were afraid someone would come and take it away. "All for you," I smiled, sipping a fresh glass of sparkling water. "You can eat as much or as little as you want. No rush." "Mom," he asked after a mouthful of fudge, "is Uncle Asher in timeout?" I looked back through the glass doors of the patio. Inside, I could see the commotion at Booth 1. Asher was on his phone, pacing frantically, waving his arms. Peyton was sitting with her arms crossed, refusing to look at him. The security guards were standing like statues, unmoving. "Yes, honey," I said. "Uncle Asher is in a very long timeout." It took them 3 hours. I found out later from Michael that Asher had to call his ex-wife, the one before Peyton, and beg for a loan against his car title. She laughed at him for 20 minutes before agreeing, only because Asher signed over the rights to his car entirely. Peyton had to call her father, a man who despised Asher, and beg for the rest. They paid the bill at 11:15 p.m. But the justice didn't stop there. The crypto deal Asher had been bragging about? It turned out he had taken deposits from 3 other people, friends of ours from the old neighborhood, promising them returns he couldn't deliver. When news of his public meltdown and financial insolvency at the Gilded Anchor hit the grapevine, and hospitality grapevines are notoriously fast, those investors panicked. They went to the police. 2 weeks later, Asher was indicted for fraud. It wasn't the seafood dinner that got him. It was the Ponzi scheme he had been running to fund the dinners. But it was the dinner that broke the dam. Peyton left him before the handcuffs were even on. She filed for divorce the day after the restaurant incident, citing irreconcilable differences, though irreconcilable brokenness would have been more accurate. She tried to friend me on Facebook a month later, sending a long message about how she was a victim of Asher's lies too. I didn't reply, I just blocked her. As for me, I stopped hiding. The Monday after the dinner, I walked into the corporate headquarters of the Gilded Anchor not as a consultant, but as the owner. I took the corner office. I put my name on the door. I realized that by hiding my success, I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting Asher's ego. I was making myself small so he wouldn't feel like a failure. And all that did was give him the space to fail bigger, to hurt more people, to hurt my son. Mason and I are doing just fine. We have Sunday dinners at home now. We cook together. Sometimes we make seafood, sometimes we make grilled cheese. But we always eat at the same time, and nobody ever stares at an empty plate. I still think about that night sometimes. I think about the look on Asher's face when the card declined. It wasn't hate I felt in that moment, it was relief. The heavy lifting was over. I had finally dropped the rope. And as I watched the city lights twinkle below us that night, sharing a Sunday with the only boy in the world who truly mattered to me, I realized that the most expensive meal of my life, the $1,400 bill I refused to pay, was actually the best investment I ever made. It bought me my freedom,